On December 17, 1903, the small business owners, inventors, and brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, made history by successfully building and flying the world's first functional airplane, named the Wright Flyer, in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, for as long as 59 seconds. Soon after this event took place, many people around the world were informed of the possibilities of manned flight and caused many people to design their own flying machines. Unfortunately, this invention has also been used as a weapon to cause many tragedies that would not have been possible without the aid of an airplane, such as 9/11 and the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now today, this aeronautical engineering triumph has caused long-distance travel to be many times faster, has given us the ability to venture into space, and soon will be able to make us have a safe landing back on Earth in spaceships. If you don't know who the Wright brothers were, you may have been living under a rock for the past 150 years, because the Wrights were just a few individuals to revolutionize the industry of travel. Even before the Wrights took to invent the first functional airplane, there were many people looking to figure out the secrets of manned flight. As far back as the 1700s, there were many aspiring to make a working flying machine, utilizing various methods. One of such designs was simply strapping wings to one's arms and flapping as vigorously as they could, mimicking birds. All designs like this had one major flaw, which is that as you get bigger, the proportional energy you need to create lift gets larger. This meant small mammals like birds could use this trick, but something as large and heavy as a human would be far too heavy to produce enough lift to fly. Another failed design was to use a bike as a helicopter. It failed because pedaling to spin the propeller blades fast enough to gain lift is impossible by any average human. Many flight essentials changed when the Wright brothers made their first functional airplane. One thing they did differently was making the airplane much larger than usual, which meant they couldn't shift body weight to turn. They instead used something called wing warping to turn, which literally warped the ends of the wings to get the air going through the plane's wings in such a way as to force it to turn, and making small adjustments could stabilize flight. They also put a curve into the wing to force more wind down, thus making more lift. These attributes put together gave the Wrights the ability to fly, and is still how we fly today. Now today, airplanes are much larger and faster. Your typical jet airliner travels at a cruising speed of about 500 miles per hour and can weigh more than 700,000 pounds. But how did we get here? One of the Wright brothers' biggest rivals was Glenn Curtiss. Glenn Curtiss improved on the Wrights' plane designs, most notably adding wheels for easier takeoff and landing, improved the Wrights' wing warping design, and gave the planes the ability to take off and land on the water. The addition of wheels on the airplane is relatively simple, but the improved wing warping design is a bit more ingenious. Instead of warping the tips at the end of the airplane to stabilize and turn the aircraft, their flaps cut closer to the fuselage to fulfill the same need. This was a similar method to the original design, but was slightly more effective at turning. By swiveling both flaps upward as high as possible would cause a considerable amount of wind resistance, which could be used to slow down and brake the aircraft. This design could also cause more lift by pointing the flaps downwards, which would force more air downwards, causing more lift. The water landing gear was also quite the advancement, simply by the fact that planes can now be flown further over the water, among other perks that come with being able to take off and land on the water. These seaplanes have a somewhat simple basic design. You essentially attach some pontoons to a plane. What's most complicated is to make the pontoons relatively light and aerodynamic. To make them light, you have to use a lighter material like aluminum to make it, but there's no particular material to use. To make the pontoons more aerodynamic, it's best to have a curved, larger edge near the front, and as you reach the back of the pontoon, it gets more narrow until it breaks off into a sharp edge. This makes it much easier for the wind to go through the pontoons, can even cause minor lift from the curve of the pontoon, similar to a standard wing design. Those advancements were made about 100 years ago, so what advancements in aero engineering have been made since then? Some of the most notable new advancements in airplanes are the additions of more flaps on the wing. The normal flaps are used just as they were when the Glenn Curtiss first improved on the Wrights design, to be turned downwards or upwards to either cause lift or slow down the plane, but are now not used to turn. Now there are ailerons and slats. The slats are at front of the wing and curve downward to force more wind up and over the wing and eventually the sound wing to cause even more lift. The ailerons are now used to turn, which are located in the same area as the flaps. You simply flap one up and the other down to bank and change path. To actually turn the orientation of the plane and not just its path, you have to turn the rudder, which is located on the tail. There's also the elevator on the tail, which changes elevation the same way the wings do, but is easier to use during flight, since there are only two flaps to control. These large advancements weren't made by a single person or a team, but were made over the years by leagues of air engineers. There is no doubt this wouldn't have been possible for Wrights to have their first initial ideas and concepts they included in their first functional plane design. Unfortunately, the invention of the plane or any other invention isn't always used for good. Sometimes, it's used as a weapon. On September 11, 2001, terrorists crashed over United Airlines Flight 175 into the World Trade Center, killing over 2,900 and injuring more than 6,000 people. This may have not been possible if the Wrights wouldn't have invented the wing warping design, not improved by Glenn Curtiss and others. Let me explain how a jet airliner crashing into something as narrow as a skyscraper is possible. In the days before the Wright brothers, most flying designs were smaller and simpler, only using body weight to turn and bank the aircraft. Of course, none of these designs worked properly, or at all. Turning was very imprecise since they were literally shifting body weight to turn in just orientation. This all changed when the Wrights came up with the wing warping design. Wing warping, as you sure to know, is the turning/stabilization design invented by the Wright brothers. Since you could adjust precisely how much to fold the wings and turn, turning airplanes became very precise. When Glenn Curtiss improved the Wrights design, it became even more precise, since there are now two flaps on each wing to adjust and turn. Now on commercial jet airliners, there are even more precise controls to turn, bank, and adjust elevation of the airplane. It's precise enough to land on a narrow runway, make relatively sharp turns, and of course, to crash into a tall skyscraper. This combined with the plane's large and heavy size and incredibly high speed from the power jet engine made the plane to be able to do massive damage when it crashes. That's not the worst thing planes have done when being used as a weapon. Under the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Fat Man and Little Boy were atomic bombs blown up over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were designed to be very powerful and thus had to be very large. A large vehicle may have been able to carry such a large weapon, but as Japan is an island far from the US, as well as it being very obvious that the vehicle is carrying some sort of weapon, that tactic would have not worked in any capacity. To carry a bomb overseas would not have been possible. As you know, before the Wrights invented the first airplane design, most people used a method of shifting body weight to turn and bank their aircraft. This severely limited the size of aircraft to be only a bit larger than the average man, which meant it couldn't carry much more than one person. This all changed when the Wrights found a new way to turn, wing warping. With this design, the plane could be as large as they wanted, which also meant that a plane could carry much more than just one guy. It could carry a whole fleet of passengers, like on an airliner, it could carry a passenger suitcase and cargo, like on a cargo plane, or it could carry a nearly 5-ton bomb, like how the Boeing B-29 carried Little Boy and Fat Man over Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and dropped them. Airplanes aren't always used as weapons like in 9/11 and bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Most of the time, planes are used to further society into the future. As you already know, there have been many aero-engineering achievements made because of the Wright brothers' first initial working design. But the Wright brothers also actually affected the organization NASA, which orchestrated the first manned flight to the moon. The Wright brothers creating the first functional airplane affected how the space shuttle was made, and if the very first airplane was never made, we may not have spaceships as we know them today. In 1930, Frank Whittle of Great Britain made the very first jet engine, which was meant to be used on an airplane. This jet engine is much more powerful than a standard piston-powered engine, but was much less fuel efficient at lower altitudes. That is why it is only meant to be used on jet airplanes and not passenger planes. By the 1950s, people found out if you were to fly a passenger plane at 40,000 feet, instead of just 10,000, since the air is thinner, jet airplanes will be even more fuel efficient than standard airplanes, and thus piston-powered airplanes were replaced by jets. By then, NASA was working on the first manned shuttle to the moon. They had problems with the engine because your typical jet engine needs oxygen to work, and there is no oxygen in space. Soon enough, NASA scientists found out a way to store oxygen with the engine, which isn't a problem for standard jet airplanes because they obviously fly on Earth where oxygen is everywhere. In the depths of space, there is no oxygen to be found, which means it had to be stored in the space shuttle's engine. Soon enough, NASA found a way to store oxygen within the engine so it could work in space. This new engine was called Aerojet Rocketdyne RS-25. NASA scientists decided to strap the engine to the first manned space shuttle that went to the moon, Apollo 11, and it worked well, reliably bringing Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin to and from the moon. If the Wright brothers were to never invent the first airplane, it may not exist in its current form, which meant Frank Whittle may have not invented the jet engine. If the jet engine never existed, the engine on Apollo 11 may have never worked. That's not all the airplanes have done to the aerospace industry. Many space shuttles used by NASA, like Challenger, could go into a lawn-powered glaze back down to Earth, which meant it could also be reused. This idea came from NASA students when it used to be called NASA, spelled with a C, which in that point in time had only focused on aerial engineering. This experience from NASA's old days gave them the ability to make it so that shuttle could glide well in the air, similar to an airplane. If the airplane wasn't existing in its current form from the Wright brothers, NASA may have not been able to come up with such a design that relies heavily upon the principles of how airplanes fly. The airplane is overall one of the greatest inventions of the last century. From the humble beginning starting with the most basic functional airplane flown in North Carolina to today's jumbo jets that can travel over 9,000 miles or more than 500 miles per hour and can even carry over 100 people at a time, planes have come a long way. Planes have affected our journey into space with modern airplanes, advanced jet engine design, and even gliding and turning methods used in some spacecraft. It may have also been used as a terrible weapon used for harm, like bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and 9/11, but any great invention could be used in that way. The airplane has greatly reduced the risk, cost, and made travel far faster than it has ever been, and I conclude its positives far outweigh any negatives it's caused.